In the last episode, we learned how to move 6 types of pieces. In this episode, we will learn about some more special types of moves. Check in chess, victory and defeat are determined by the king. Only if a player can capture the king can a player win. So if the king is attacked, the player must make the king safe. In chess, this is called a check. The attacking piece is removed, and another piece is placed between the attacking piece and the king to create an obstacle. Or the king has to be moved to another safe square, and the check is returned. For example, in this case, the white player can move the queen to the E2 square. In this, the black king, which is located directly, is attacked. As a result, the black player has to make a move so that the king is safe. For example, now the white rook cannot be captured with a pawn. The black player can make the king safe in 3 ways. First, by capturing the queen. Secondly, creating an obstacle between the queen and the king. Thirdly, by moving the king to a safe room. In the same way, in this case, the white player cannot capture the black queen because his king is attacked. The king must be forced to be released from danger, but now the king cannot be moved to the F1 square because the bishop has a view of this square. As a result, the king must be moved to the D1 square and checked. It is noted that if the knight is checked, no other piece can be placed between the knight and the king to check it. The knight must be captured, or the king must be moved to a safe square. For example, in this case, the white team can check the black king with the knight. The black knight cannot check by placing the rook between the king and the king. Either the knight must be captured, or the king must be moved to a safe square. As soon as the king is killed, the game ends. Therefore, no piece can be moved that would attack the king, for example. In this case, the black queen can be captured with the knight, in which the black king is attacked, but in the next move, the black bishop can directly capture the white king, and the game ends immediately. As a result, the white team loses. The white player does not get a chance to capture the black king in the next move. For the same reason, the pawn cannot be moved. If the pawn is moved, the king behind the pawn is attacked. We will learn more about these in the Keshling section. Keshling. A player gets the opportunity to move once in a move. But in this move, during Keshling, the king moves 2 squares towards the rook at the same time, and the rook sits on the square towards which the king moves. There are 3 conditions in this move. First, the king or rook cannot change places before. The king or rook can only be Keshling on the first move. Players from both sides can Keshling only once in each game. Second, there cannot be any other piece between the king or rook. Third, the king cannot be attacked, and the square on which it passes or the square on which it sits cannot be seen by any of the opponent's pieces. But there is no problem if the rook is attacked. For example, suppose the situation in the game after a few moves is like this. Now the black team can use the queen to give a check to the white team. In this situation, Keshling cannot be done. If the king is moved up 1 square, the white team will never be able to Keshling again, because the white king has changed places. The white king will not be able to Keshling on this square later. Again, if the situation is like this, Keshling cannot be done, because the king will have to cross the F1 square and Keshling, on which the queen of each side has the view. For the same reason, castling cannot be done in this situation. The square where the king sits has the view of the bishop of each side. In this situation, Keshling will not happen. There is a knight between the rook and the king. In this situation, Keshling will happen, because Keshling can be done if the rook is attacked. That is, if all the conditions are met, the king's side can be Keshling in this way, and the queen's side can be Keshling. Pawn promotion. When the pawn is on the edge of the board, the white pawn is on the 8th rank, and the black pawn is on the 1st rank. The player can promote it to any power except the king. For example, in this case, as soon as the pawn reaches the A8 square on the A2 square, the player can replace it with a queen, rook, knight, bishop, etc. However, in general, the pawn is promoted to a queen. If it is promoted to another power, it is called under promotion. In some special cases, it is promoted to another power. Similarly, the pawn on the G7 square can become a queen as soon as it reaches the G1 square. In many regions, it is seen that the player can promote the piece that has been captured earlier. But this is wrong. Multiple queens can be taken. That is, if the pawn on the b2 square reaches the b8 square, the white player can replace it with a queen. Similarly, if the pawn on the h7 square reaches the h1 square, the black player can replace it with a queen. In many regions, it is seen that the queen cannot be taken even after the pawn reaches the edge. The player has to take the queen on the next move. This is also wrong. As soon as the pawn reaches the edge, it becomes a queen. For example, in this case, the pawn becomes a queen as soon as it reaches the a8 square. In this case, the black king is attacked by the queen. The black player cannot then advance the pawn to the queen, because the king must be freed from danger. That is, the king must be brought up. The white queen can capture the pawn on the next move. En passant, when a pawn moves 2 squares on its first move and there is a pawn on the file directly next to that square, the opponent can, if he wishes, move his pawn 1 square forward. That is, the square the pawn has crossed, to capture the pawn that has moved 2 squares. The player will only get the opportunity to make this move on his next move. If he does not capture the pawn on the next move, he will never be able to capture this pawn in this way. The white player can move the pawn on the f2 square to the f4 square. The black player can capture the pawn on the e4 square, with the pawn on the f4 square in this way. Or he can capture the pawn on the g4 square with the pawn on the f4 square in this way. But in this move, other pieces, such as the knight move, will never be able to capture the pawn on the f4 square according to the en passant. Now we will calculate which of the pieces is stronger. Note that the pawn can only move forward 1 square. It cannot go back. It can only capture the piece on each side that is located diagonally 1 square in front. On the other hand, the bishop can move diagonally as many squares as it wants and can capture another piece. That is, the bishop is stronger than the pawn. But the bishop on the black square can never go to the white square, and the bishop on the white square can never go to the black square. The rook can move straight as many squares as it wants and can capture another piece. So the rook is stronger than the bishop. If the value of the pawn is taken as 1 point in terms of strength, then the value of the bishop will be 3 points, and the value of the rook is 5 points. The value of the knight is 3 points. The queen can move straight like the rook and diagonally like the bishop. So the value of the queen is the highest, 9 points. However, these values apply to the general case. In special situations, the knight or bishop is more valuable than the rook. Sometimes the pawn in front can be more valuable than the rook. The king can only move 1 square in any direction, which means it has less power, but its value is the most. As soon as the king is killed, that team is defeated. That is, the game is over. So the responsibility of all the pieces is to keep the king safe and put the opponent's king in danger. If the queen has to be lost to keep the king safe, then it must be lost. On the other hand, if the queen can be checked by losing the queen, then it should be done. Therefore, in the game, we have to calculate so that we can do what will be profitable. For example, suppose we capture the rook in exchange for the knight, then we should do so, because it will gain 2 points. Similarly, if we capture the queen of each side in exchange for the rook and bishop, then we should do so. This will gain 1 point. In the game, if a player is ahead by some points through such exchanges, then in the last step of the game, it will be seen that he has 2, 3 pawns more than each side. Then the player can convert the pawn into a queen and defeat the opponent. In the next episode, we will learn about the results of the chess game so far today.